I'm going to take a butterfly pose. So welcome to Candlelight Yin. We're going to be together for a while. These poses I generally hold for anywhere between 3 to 5 minutes. Tonight we'll have some 3-minute poses, some 5-minute poses, and some poses that are 4 minutes, and then Shavasana at the end. So I'm going to start in a butterfly shape. So my knees are out, and I'm going to let my back fold into a kind of rounded shape. Sometimes it's more comfortable to have a little bit of support under the knees. So if you've got a couple little throw pillows or you've got a blanket, you can put that underneath. Sometimes it's more comfortable to build up a little stack of props so you have something to rest your forehead on. Some people, of course, have the range of motion where they can actually rest their forehead on their feet. If starting in a child's pose or a lying down position would be better for you, you're welcome to take that pose instead. And then once you've chosen a pose, I like to take a few moments just to sort of snuggle in, get the sit bones out from behind me, let the back relax, rinse out tension from my neck and shoulders, check in, make sure I like the way the props are, and then as I kind of slowly let myself sink in, I might along the way sort of explore leaning a little bit one direction, or a little bit the other direction, along the way, just to sort of experiment with the pose and the sensation and where I'm noticing the connective tissue of my back and my hips and my glutes. Kind of changing or slightly loosening or just accommodating might be the right word, this pose. It's possible that your day was fairly uneventful. It's also possible your day was quite stressful. And so this, time that we spend in our practice is our time to let go of some of those things and just be present for the next breath that's coming now, and for the breath that's leaving. Just allowing yourself to get heavy and sink in. You find, like, I just went just a notch further forward and I'm like, no, it's a little too spicy. So I just let myself back off. Make sure your breaths are deep and smooth. And every now and then you'll find your mind kind of wandering off to stuff. And when you find it wandering, you just catch yourself thinking about something else. Just bring your mind back and catch the breath again. So we'll stay for about another 1.5 minutes or so here. Noticing those places where you hold or carry tension in your body. And consciously, trying to let it get softer. All right, yogis, so we're going to take a nice big breath. Let go with a big, and then inhale your way up. or out of your child's pose, depending on which pose you chose. Once you get to that point where you've sort of come out of the shape, now my back still feels like it wants to go forward, so I'm just going to lean back a little bit, and then I'm going to kind of wiggle my legs out and sort of let my chest open a little bit the other direction. Oh. We're going to come back to this idea in a moment. Now, it might be nice to do some little washing machine moves with your spine, or some little cat-cow moves. And if you were doing child's pose, you could do those as kneeling cat-cows. If you were doing the seated pose, you can move your spine in those directions seated, or you can do the cat-cows the other way. Do your thing. You just have to get up and get back down. That's not the end of the world. Okay, so we're going to take a seated position when you feel like you've sort of rinsed everything out. That is the deer shape. So to do the deer shape, I'm going to turn a little bit on an angle so it's easier to see. All right. So one leg is going to come behind me, and I want that leg to more or less kind of stick directly out to the side. And I've got about a 90-degree angle. You don't have to maintain exactly that angle, just somewhere in that neighborhood. And then it's about 90 degrees from this thigh to this thigh. So this thigh sticks straight out in front. And then you can just pause like that. So we've got a couple different things happening. This is a little bit of an internal rotation of this femur bone, this thigh bone. And this little muscle right here that's responsible for that might be feeling that, like right where your front pocket is, okay? You might also be feeling something in this outer hip. And so depending on how much sensation that is, you may want to, like, you could sit on a pillow to elevate yourself up a little bit. You could open these angles up or tighten the angles up to make room for your joints. There shouldn't be any pain in your knee. There shouldn't be any pain in your low back, especially around the sacrum. So if you need to turn a different direction or even lean forward, you can do that. I like to make like a little pillow mountain and kind of rest my elbow. And mostly sit up. Sometimes I'll turn this way or that way just to hang with this shape. Oh. It's an unusual shape to do. It's been feeling good to me lately because I have been spending more time working with technology, which makes me sit in kind of more externally rotated ways because I don't have an actual desk. I sit on the floor. So it feels nice to kind of change the shape in the legs a little bit. I don't know why I don't think about that when I'm working on the computer, but I don't. I'm focused. So I'm going to stay with the shape for, like, we're about halfway through, but a couple more minutes. Taking some deep breaths and kind of noticing, like, should you lean your pose over that way a little bit, or should you lean your pose towards the front a little bit? And it's really just you deciding how it feels to be in this shape today. I like to try out lots of different options and then pick one. And inside of that last minute now. Sometimes I find myself kind of holding my mouth a little bit tense. And so when I catch myself doing that, just reminding myself to relax the mouth. So we're going to take a big breath. All right, now we're going to transform this shape into a half saddle. To do that, we're going to bring this back leg forward a little bit. Now, I cannot do a half saddle with my foot all the way up against the side of my hip. Some people can. So if you can bring your foot right up and then lay straight back, that is one idea. if you have, like I have here, some distance between the heel and the thigh, the issue is that the thigh wants to go that way and the hip wants to go that way. And so they need to be paired. So the way that I do this is I lay back and I rotate my hip to match the knee so that the thigh and the knee and the hip are all aligned, okay? You can also elevate your hips. So if you put a couple pillows or a pillow, big pillow, underneath your hip of the long leg, that might elevate you enough that this foot then is in alignment straight up and down. Okay, so that is not true for me. So I'm gonna put a pillow underneath my back and I'm gonna lay a little bit to the side. I'm gonna reorient myself a little bit this way. And just take a moment and get yourself settled in, because there's not really one right way to do a pose, but there is a way that's feeling better to you tonight, right? So if you need a blanket underneath your shin, or you need a couple pillows to lean back on, take the time to get those things settled in. Okay. Now, as soon as I feel sensation on the top of my thigh, and I'm kind of letting my hip roll this way, I'm there. That's the pose. Some people can lay all the way onto their back. I like to prop up on the pillow that's behind me. And so I might like let go of this. I like to rest my head in my hand. Sometimes that feels really nice. But if that gets tedious, I can rest my head a little different direction or put an extra pillow in there. And so mostly I'm focused on the sensation being on the top of the thigh, the front of the hip. There's a little bit of a back bend, so there's some sensation there. And of course, on the top of the foot or the top of the shin, particularly if you have a firm surface like a wooden floor underneath you. And so we're going to pause here for a bit. Taking deep breaths and maybe kind of eventually surrendering more and more and more of ourselves backwards into the shape. Maybe never surrendering that much. Maybe even sitting more upright. And again, for the purposes of yin, the only wrong way to do a pose is to do a pose that hurts. And hurt means sharp shooting pain or numbness or tingling, or there's a kind of interesting sensation in joints that are being overly pressured. This might be the right word for it. And that sensation feels like heat or like a burning. And that could be the joint capsule tissue, like the labrum in the hip or the meniscus in the knee. That's this kind of connective tissue protective layer. That could be that, or it could be some other, part of that joint, the ligaments themselves kind of holding the joint together, that's creating that burning sensation, but it's not usually a good sign. And so if you feel like a funkiness in the knee or funkiness in the hip, definitely adjust. So I felt like a little bit more pressure on my inner knee than my outer knee, so clearly that wasn't balanced. So I folded my blanket a little bit to make room for that. We're going to stay with this pose for not quite 2 minutes more. So we're just past the halfway mark. A wee bit longer. And always with yin, we're trying to let go into the shape, trying to relax tension from the muscle. Especially when we first start getting into these poses, sometimes you might even feel like your quads kind of kick on to try to support you. And so allowing the quads to relax so that we're transferring some of the load into the fascia, most particularly, that wraps around these muscles. The body is not separate. We can't do one thing without doing other things, so all of it's happening together, of course. But the relaxed muscle is interesting. There's other ways to get to that kind of a thing, but this is definitely an interesting practice. We're inside that last minute. If this pose is one that is kind of spicy for you, a little bit more intense, you can come out of there a little bit early if you need for sure. Sometimes, especially when you're first starting out doing yin yoga, you don't have to hold the poses as long to get the benefit. For me, I've been doing it so long that it really feels best if I stay a little longer. I get more benefit after the 3-minute mark than before. Okay, so we're going to take a deep breath. You're going to draw your 2 thighs as close together as you can. This is one way to come out. And so as I roll, my top thigh with that knee that's a little bit precarious is supported by the bottom thigh. And then I can straighten that guy out and then give that leg a shake. Now, if you want to come out of that a different way, you certainly can. Just be mindful of the fact that your knee is vulnerable and come out carefully. And then I do some movement every time I release a yin pose. Doesn't have to be a lot of movement, but a little bit, depending on how deep the tissue was or how intense I was feeling it. So I'm checking in to see, like, how does my thigh feel? How does my knee feel? How does my kind of overall body sensation of the release of that shape? And if this all feels lighter or a little bit almost like effervescent, my foot's not asleep, things like that, if it feels pleasant, then that's a good indication that you're good. You're on the right track. If when you come out of a pose it feels clunky or painful or tender, then that is an indication that it was too intense. And you might consider adding more props to your practice or coming out a little earlier. So when we get to the other side, you can make that choice. Now, we're going to do a swan, and I'm going to suggest that leg that was out straight is now your bent leg, and the leg that was bent is now your straight leg. And you can certainly do your swan with a more bent leg than a straight, right? It doesn't have to be all the way straight. You can put pillows or something under your hip. You can recline your swan all the way down, or you can prop your swan up. Now I'm going to do kind of a hybrid swan. So I'm going to do half my pose like I am right now so that I get more of the back bend. And then I'm going to take this pose and flip it upside down when we get to the second half. So we're going to stay a while. This is going to be a little bit longer than the other two. Not much, but a little. So again, you can follow me and turn the pose upside down at the halfway mark, or you can stay where you are, or choose a slightly different option. And there's 2 different sensations with this pose for me, big sensations. There's the big sensation of opening the front of this hip, and especially when I do the back bend part, there's extension at the front of the hip here. And so I'm getting quads and psoas and the little tiny muscle right here called tensor fasciae lata, like a bunch of little muscles. The connective tissue for all of that lies over the front of this hip. And so I'm trying to, through the belly of the hip and over the front of the pubic bone. So I'm trying to kind of gently let that get tractioned as I breathe. If I'm down lower, I don't feel that as much. So if I'm very tight there, if I have very tight hip flexors, it might be better to stay low because I'm not going to put as much pressure there. And then I'm also feeling a lot in the bent leg hip over in the butt cheek region, the external hip rotators and the glutes, all kind of living in that outer hip. Okay, so we're just about to the halfway mark. We got just a little bit longer. And this is a good point just to tone in and see, like, oh yeah, am I breathing deeply? Am I relaxing? Does it feel like I'm kind of tensing up? And so I'm going to flip my pose upside down at this moment. So to do that, I'm just going to flip over, and I might want a little pillow under my head. I definitely like to have a pillow under the leg that I'm going to extend. So I'm going to extend this leg out just because I don't have that much space here. So I'm going to extend that leg out and it's got a place to rest, and then I'm going to hold onto this leg. And by just kind of hanging on out with it, I've taken some of the pressure out of this area. I've taken some of the pressure away from my knee, but I'm also just giving myself a different shape. And this is a little deeper in the hip socket for me. Sometimes I'll let go of the foot, but be mindful of the knee joint here, because you can accidentally pull too much on the lower lever of the lever of the lower leg to create trouble for your knee. Sometimes it feels nice to just reach across and hold that way. Sort of almost a happy baby. So you can feel it out or follow along. So now the weight of my body is kind of coming down into or towards the hip socket, and it feels interesting. It doesn't feel dangerous. If it had burning sensation or something else was happening, I might change my mind. But it feels nice, like a gentle kind of intensity. And one of the things that seems to happen when we hang out with poses a little bit longer is we kind of get a little bit of a hydrating effect. There's a stimulation to hyaluronic acid production in the tissue. And so I want a little bit of that for my hip joints so they feel a little more viscous and smooth moving. And so we've got just about another minute here. And this is that point where if you're realizing, I'm done. My timer has gone off. It's time to take me out of the oven. Take your pose away. Come out of your pose. And then you can spend that extra minute moving or laying on your back in Shavasana, just kind of letting everything settle. Those are really lovely ways to practice too. I have done a kind of yoga called Sivananda yoga in the past. And the teachers that I've practiced that with, essentially the way they worked is that you would do a pose and then you would lay in Shavasana and feel the effects. And then do a pose and lay in Shavasana and feel the effects. And I didn't get it at first. It took me a long time to realize what they were up to. When I was in my 20s, I found that incredibly boring. I liked the flow yoga. Or things that moved along anyway. All right, yogis. So we're going to take 2 more big breaths. And then a nice big inhale. And then you're going to gently release yourself from your swan, however you've chosen to get your swan together there. And then come onto your back. Or you can just sit and kind of lean back. That's fine too. And then rinse everything out a little bit. Give it a little movement. Give it a little stillness and feel. Right? So you are checking in to see what sensations do I feel. So this whole side of my body where I had my bent leg, right, feels longer and softer than the other side. Still feels interesting on the other side, but it's definitely a different sensation. And I like checking out that kind of And then when I do the other side, I can check and see if it's similar. Did it have a similar impact? Is one side of my body a little more inclined to softness than the other side? What happens? Now we're going to stay for about a minute here, just chillaxing. Taking some deep breaths. You can use this time too to kind of wiggle in the toes or do some little ankle circles or little wrist circles just to kind of rinse that out. So take a nice deep breath. Let go with a big Now, before we do the other side of our deer, saddle, and swan, we're going to actually do a little bit of a sphinxy shoulder opener. Now, a pillow or a yoga block will be handy for what we're to do. Now, if you don't have yoga blocks, you don't need to have yoga blocks. You'll be fine. But here's the way I use the yoga blocks. You can also use a pillow or couch cushion or anything, or even a couple of books, something that kind of gives you a little bit of firmness. Okay. So the reason I like the yoga blocks is because I can put my face in between them. And this works out pretty well. Okay. I'm going to move the mic because otherwise it's going to get a little bit crazy. All right. So laying on your belly, like you would for a sphinx, you're going to position your elbows up on the blocks, and then you're going to let your forehead drop through. If you don't have blocks, you have whatever you have, right? So your elbows are up on top, and you're going to see if you can let your forehead rest on the floor. Now, my forehead doesn't go all the way to the floor. This is pretty intense. We're not going to stay for very long, but we are going to see if we can hang out here for 2 minutes. Kind of letting this upper back and the triceps on the back of the arm release. This upper back is an area where I carry a lot of my tension and stress. And so along the way, sometimes it feels nice to move the neck. And then go back in and see. See my forehead, when I do that, my forehead dropped just a tiny bit closer to the ground. It might eventually make its way down there. We'll see. Now, for some people, if this is way too spicy, you can probably just do a crocodile. Just cross your arms and rest your forehead on the crossed arms up in front of you. This little extra bit of space made by the block may not be necessary. So we're going to stay for about 3 more big breaths. All right, so to come out of this, I'm going to take one arm at a time. And then I'm going to just kind of roll those babies around. And then we'll do our other side. I'll tell you, it took a while. But at the end of that, my forehead was lightly touching the carpet. It was very unusual. Okay. So we'll take the deer on the other side. Piling up your pillows or whatever you have nearby to make an armrest, or leaning forward, or making maybe more of a little twist to the outside. Maybe you lean a little bit more to the side. I bought this for myself a long time ago. It's a avocado with a face. But it does make a nice little yoga prop because it's kind of pointy. So if you've got like a little, maybe you have some plushies laying around your house, those can make good yoga props too. You can be really creative with yoga props. They don't have to be the kind you spend fancy money on. And so again, kind of, so we're getting kind of close to that halfway mark. A little bit longer, but almost. And so feeling yourself, try to settle in, fall into the shape. Take a nice deep breaths. Now, this could be that moment where you say to yourself, I think I'm done. Like, we've got one more minute here as a group, right? As a team. But for you, if you want to come out, you might. And then this could be for me, like, it's a good time to sort of turn a little bit, because I know I'm only going to do this for another minute. I could put just a tiny bit more sensation of dropping into that hip a little bit towards the floor. So that's kind of the dance, right? The dance of the edge in yin is, I just want to feel something. Not, oh, I can't stand it, almost can't stand it. That's way past the edge. Oh, I just feel something. And then for me, sometimes the 3-minute mark is kind of magical, because there's a point where some parts of my body relax that maybe I didn't even realize weren't completely letting go yet. And there's this sort of softening that happens. It happens again around the 6 or 7 minute mark for me. For you, that might happen at 30 seconds, it really, who knows? And so you figure things out. If it's right for you to drop in deeper, you drop in deeper. If it's wrong, you don't do that. So we're going to take a big breath. Okay, and then we're going to take this guy and you can bring that leg forward to come into your half saddle, or if you just want to let that leg go for a moment, and that feels good too. And then bring it back to the half saddle. You can do that. So again, the half saddle brings that leg that was behind us into a kind of hero shape. So it's called, different names for yin. If you were going to call this by the name that it is normally done in yoga, you might call it half hero pose or half lightning bolt pose, depending on who translates what. Hero is not exactly the right word, but it's the character, it's a character from, I'm pretty sure, the Mahabharata, could be the Ramayana, but in any case, to look that up because I can't remember, but in any case, one of the kind of epic tales from India, there's a character who hero pose is named after, so he's kind of a hero but also kind of a god. So it's sort of like the Iliad and the Odyssey in Greece. There's a lot of similarities in terms of the kind of tales they are and the kind of supernatural things that show up. Okay, so hopefully as you're kind of settling in to this shape, that's kind of at the tail end of our first minute here, you're noticing, do I need that little extra bit of support under my knee, or am I kind of finally letting go? Do I need to adjust my angles? Do I need a little support under an arm or shoulder or hip? A head? And so feeling yourself dropping in a little deeper now, about halfway through. If it feels like, things are letting go, awesome. If it feels like you're getting, like your body's trying to fight you, don't fight. We're lovers, not fighters, y'all. Find ways to let yourself drop it. Or take away some of the pressure. And then you'll kind of feel this out because we're approaching that. We've got like a minute and a half left, so approaching that last minute. Deciding how long you're able to stay. Is it finally starting to get softer or more inviting? So we're going to take another 2 big breaths. And then you're going to come out of this pose with care. So I'm going to give myself that little extra bit of support there. So as I roll, my knees got something to hug against, the opposite thigh. And then give that leg a little movement. Oh, especially the top of the ankle for me, it feels good to do some little circles. Check in with your knee. And make sure everything feels okay before you move on into your swan pose. So I'm going to leave that leg straight out behind me. Or mostly straight anyway. I'm going to position myself so that I'm more upright. Oh, I could just prop up on my hands too. I like to have pillows because they're softer and they're more inviting. But you could prop up on your hands, yogis, or not prop up at all. And so you're feeling your way into this shape that is the swan or swan equivalent. And again, you can, kind of swing that leg out into a more bent position, or you can put pillows underneath you to make it more inviting. Taking nice deep breaths. Kind of noticing, just again, kind of any tension I might be carrying around my neck. Continually bringing myself back to relaxing through the mouth and the eyes. Got about 30 seconds before we get to that halfway point, and I'm going to flip my pose. For you, this might be a good time to just check in, see how things are going, make adjustments, add props, take them away. Maybe all you gotta do is just breathe deeper. Here in my house, I'm listening to the kind of soft gurgle of this humidifier I have, so my plants are happy. For you, you might have like some soft music going. Or if you think that would be beneficial, you could put some of that on. Okay. So I'm going to take a big breath. And then I'm going to take this pose around and into the reclining version, and you can stay where you are or change it up a little. Oh. Got a little bit more room to extend out on this side. Oh. And so again, I'm kind of allowing myself to kind of feel the effect of gravity sort of pulling the weight of my body into the floor. It feels really nice too. Sort of feel this front of this hip just really relaxing and letting go. And for you, if the spicy part of this pose is the bent leg hip, if you just shift your attention and awareness to softening through the back leg hip, the long leg hip, what happens? Now, yogis, we're inside that last minute. And again, this could be the time where you're like, I'm good. Time to go. Not go, but out of the pose. Or this could be the point where it just suddenly, it just is like, oh yeah, it's getting good now, baby. And so you judge based on that sensation. How is the sensation? Nice deep breaths. All right, yogis, we got 2 more. Big inhale. And then with your exhale, you're going to slowly unwind your swan pose. Oh. And again, if you're on your back, just pause. Lay on your back for a moment. Feel. Does it feel like that side got a chance to release in the same way that the other side did? Do they feel different? Is it the same? Now are you lopsided again? We might have to start all over again. And then if you're seated, you can also just kind of do some movement with your legs, little movement, little settling. So yogis, we're going to stay here for about 3 more breaths, and then we're going to flip over again, and this time we're going to do the frog pose. Now, we're going to try to do the frog pose for 4 minutes. It's pretty intense. So if the frog pose would be better, done half at a time, 1 leg at a time, for 2 minutes on each side, you can do it that way. I'll show you what I mean. Okay, take a big breath. Let go with a big and then we're going to flip ourselves around. Now, I'm going to try to face you. And I can show you what we're going to do. Okay, so pillows would be helpful. Often I like to have kind of like a pillow up front. So you're going to come onto your knees and your elbows, and then like a wide-kneed child's pose, we're going to take the knees out wide. Now you can have your toes pointing in, so it can be a lot like a wide-kneed child's pose, and just settle here. Or you can take your feet and flip them out like little frog flippers. I like to take mine out wide, but I leave the toes pointing back. And then you let your hips come back until you feel something interesting in your inner thighs and groins. So this is the full frog. If I want to do the half frog, I just straighten one leg all the way out, and then I've got a half a frog, okay? Full frog, half a frog, you pick what's going to be better in your world. And you can put some pillows underneath your chest and kind of rest a little bit more on that. Ooh, the frog can be a bit spicy. One of the things I find really interesting about holding the frog is often time slows down. You would swear it's been much longer. There's a bit of a back bend to this pose, so if that feels like it's too much, you can kind of put pillows underneath you to support yourself. It's quite pleasant with pillows, actually. I can stay for long, long periods of time with pillows. This is definitely spicier because I'm really feeling those adductors kind of up near the groin. It's a sensitive area, you guys, be mindful. We're halfway through. So if you're doing half a frog, switch which leg is up. And then let yourself settle. As I stay here, I'm kind of like my torso is getting closer and closer and closer to the floor. There's quite a bit of space before. Now I might be melting. Or becoming amphibious. It's hard to know. If I start to croak, you guys know. I don't know what you'll do. You'll just get frog yoga from now on. All right, so we're inside this last minute here, yogis. We're going to be all right. It's going to be fine. I'm just taking an opportunity to relax a little more fully, trying to let the back of my neck really let go. Yogis, we got 3 more breaths. Now, coming out of the frog can be interesting. So you can go forward to come out of the frog, or take a big breath. And then you're going to lift up a little bit, plant your hands nice and firm, hug in through your groins, and you're going to pick up one knee and bring it to the center, and then pick up the other knee and bring that to the center. Woo! Often this pose feels more intense to me when I'm done with it than it did when I was holding it. So a little bit of cat-cow and some movement of that nature feels really good. Now when you're done with that movement, we're going to come to a seated position. We're going to give everything a little rinse. And you might not be ready yet. So if you're still cat-cowing, that's fine. So I'm going to grab a couple of things. A couple of throw pillows, I think, is what I'm going to use for this. You could use yoga blocks too. They work great. I think I'm going to use these throw pillows. Okay. So we're going to start with the dragonfly shape, which is to say that the legs come into a V. This poor little vulnerable area we were just working with the frog. I'm going to add a little protection, which is I'm going to support my knees. I tend to hyperextend the knee joint. So that means that the top of my knee goes to the point where there's actually this lower leg bone moves too far forward in relationship to my thigh. It's just, everybody's joints are genetically a certain way. Now, this doesn't normally bother me, except for when I do yin. And so when I do yin, because I hold these poses longer, sometimes that extra stretch in the tissue in the back of the knee, and this is a very sensitive area, by the way, is too much, and I'll feel pain in my knee later as a result. So I always protect that area by putting a little rolled up blanket under there. So there's just a slight bend in the knee. And for people with really tight inner thighs or hamstrings, that can actually be helpful for a different reason, which is that it takes some of the pressure out of your hamstrings. Okay. So I do this little get the flesh out, find the sit bones, and then we're going to sit up nice and tall and twist towards one leg. And then this is why I want the pillows, because I got short arms. So if your arms naturally find the floor really easily, you're going to be fine. But if you're like me, then having some pillows there just gives you a place to more comfortably and softly rest your hands. You don't have to feel like I don't have to feel like I'm being up on my tippy tip fingers. And so I'm letting the weight of my body sink into my sit bones, right? So my pelvis is nice and heavy. The twist feels, it's a little bit in my low back, but right here, just above the navel, where my rib cage starts, that's where I really feel this twisting begin. And my upper back is my favorite place to kind of dial the twist in. Now you can turn your head a lot, or you can turn it the other direction. I like to have the head just kind of in a twist, but not too much. Like I can turn my head a lot more, but again, I'm trying to give my neck a little break. This part of the spine between the skull and the shoulder blades, top of the rib cage, and the part of the spine between the last rib and the top of the sacrum, the lower back, are vulnerable places in the spine, right? The center part of our spine, which is what we're twisting most of, where the rib cage is, the rib cage protects the spine in many ways, right? It creates this structure. It's quite firm. Lots of bony connections. And so it's very protected. It has to be. That's where all of our internal organs are, most of them, right? The real, important ones. They're in there. So it's very good structure. This part of the spine, a little more vulnerable. And so sometimes for me, just not going all the way to 11 on the volume control of that twist feels better. So we're going to stay here for about 30 more seconds. And we're just letting the twist happen. So we're going to take a big breath. Okay, so now we're going to fold. So we're going over this front leg. Now, or with the leg you're twisting towards. You can keep going straight down over this leg. Or you can turn this into a side stretch with the arm over or the arm behind. You can do some of each. So we're going to stay here for about 3 minutes. And then we'll see how it goes. So you might do 1.5 minutes folding straight down. And 1.5 minutes folding sideways, or maybe this just feels good. So you stay here, whatever it is you were here doing. The choice you made. If this is too spicy right over here, you can bend this knee, bring your foot into the center. That'll be fine. You'll just switch sides. So that's a half a dragonfly instead of a full dragonfly. Oh. And so that's my 1.5 minutes. So I'm going to turn myself this direction. And I like to have a little bit of support for my head And then sometimes I take this arm up over the top. Sometimes I let it sit. Today it feels good just to kind of hang out with it. Just let the shoulder blade fall. And rest my hand somewhere heavy. It could be over here. I like the thigh right now, though. And this is just providing a little place for my head to get heavy and relax. So I'm giving a little bit of length to the side of my neck, which feels really lovely, yogis. We'll stay for one more minute with this shape. You might be experiencing all kinds of spiciness right in this back area. This is a really intense area. It can be quite intense. There's lots of different fiber directions to those muscles right back there. And so if they're really vulnerable feeling, definitely back off a bit. So we're going to take 2 more breaths. Nice big inhale. Now I'm going to hold my head as I come up, and I'm also going to hug in through my abs. You can also inhale and fill up your rib cage. That also sometimes works to create a little structure. Oh, now that I'm up here, I'm going to just pause for a moment, bend my knees. Give my neck a little rinse, because that was really lovely, but also quite interesting to come out of. And then I can still feel my spine bending that way, so I'm not going anywhere until the discs of my spine feel more neutral. You can also give yourself a little wiggle here to kind of release the hips before we do our other side. Okay, so right about now I'm starting to feel my spine just kind of coming back up to a tall kind of neutral place. Right, so the discs, the fluid flows over to one side, and now it's kind of flowing back where it came from. Okay, so I'm ready to do the other side. So I'm going to take my legs out to the V again. I'm going to do a little adjustment with the sit bones just to kind of get back where I was. And then I'm turning and adding my pillows where I need them. So I have a place for my hands to rest. And this is the spot we're going to pause in so that we can, do the other side of this like dragonfly, twisty, side bendy, forward bendy combo. First minute of a yoga pose, especially for me with the yin, but because I don't hold the other yoga poses quite as long. But the first little bit anyway, the first few breaths for any yoga pose, no matter what kind of practice I'm doing, is the chance for me to really check in with it. I do a little rock, a little motion, a couple of breaths. Just noticing where it, does it feel vulnerable? Does it feel interesting? Am I shifting the weight in a funny way? Like sometimes when the hamstrings are really tight, for example, like your feet will twist or turn in a yoga pose. In this case, I might be trying to jerk myself so far into the twist that I'm pulling my weight off the sit bone over on this side. And so letting that sit bone get heavy again. So I'm not leaning out of it. Not yet anyway. Might be the thing to do. So we'll stay here for about a little over 30 more seconds. All right, yogis, we're going to fold this thing forward or sideways, depending on how you did this last time. So I'm going to do forward for a minute and a half, and then I'll do the other side for a minute and a half, or do the sideways for a minute and a half. I like giving myself kind of a chance to feel this glute area and the back of this thigh. And this little bit of spiciness right there in the inner thigh before I add the spine and the sides of my waist. Of course, you should do your thing, right? It's your pose. Make it your own. Okay, so I'm gonna turn this baby for my last little bit here. Again, I might just leave that leg resting. I might wrap it behind the back. That's feeling kind of good where it is. Giving myself a little place to rest my head so that I can just focus on this tissue letting go as that hip stays heavy. And my spine moves into this more arc shape, side flexion. Nice deep breaths. Two more big breaths, yogis. Nice big inhale. Now you can come up at that point, or you can hug in, kind of give yourself a little bit of support, for the head. Let your back slowly change shapes back to normal. Now we're gonna lie down. So you can take a few more moments here, by the way, and move and jiggle and swing around, do your thing. But eventually what we're gonna do is lie down. Now, knowing that you might want to do Shavasana, and if it's a little chilly at your house, I don't know, but if it is, then you might want to have some blankets nearby, a pillow, whatever you like to have under your legs. So I'm gonna have my two little throw pillows handy. I'm just going to put them down here. I'm going to get my yoga blocks and just kind of put them out of the way. And then I'm going to have a blanket handy because I like to have a headrest. Okay. So once you've got yourself kind of situated, and if you like to have a blanket to cover yourself, then have that as well. So once you've got yourself kind of situated, then what you're going to do is bring your knees into your chest and just recline. Trying to get my mic out of the way here. I'm not being successful. I will get it out of the way in a moment. All right. So now you're on your back, or you're getting close to being on your back, one way or another. Okay. So we're going to take one leg and bring it up, and then take it across. Okay. Now, if this is too much, you can just bring your other leg and bring it in. Otherwise, what you're going to see if you can do is reach down, see if you can get hold of your foot on the bottom leg. So the top leg comes over, bottom leg curls around. You can hold onto that foot. Now, for me, holding that foot is kind of silly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the strap that I have. You can have a towel if you like, and I'm going to hold my foot with my strap. So I'm going to wrap this foot, and then I'm going to take it back down to the ground. Okay. Then I'm going to bring that leg slowly behind me, slowly behind me, slowly behind me, and then I'm going to let this leg just relax. You can rest the foot on the floor, okay? So this hand is reaching down to hold that foot. I like to have my knee a little bigger, so that's why the strap is there. This leg even could, if you have the flexibility for it, you can hold that big toe and reach all the way out through that leg. Can do it and want to do it are very different things. So you may choose not to do that, even if you can. Oh, so this is called the cat pulls its tail. And it's a nice shape. It's kind of a twist and a little bit of a quad thing, a little bit of an arm stretch. And if you want to just soften this into a regular twist, you can. We'll stay with it for about another minute. Nice deep breaths. So we're just kind of repeating some shapes that we've already done, sort of these inklings of shapes that we've already seen, some twisty things, some things that get our outer hip or a top of our thigh. And so for the last 3 breaths, letting the weight of your legs sort of traction the shoulder out can be really lovely. So we haven't really gotten the front of the shoulder in our practice yet. So just feeling the front of the shoulder sort of lengthening down through the arm bone. All the way to the foot. And take one more big breath. Now you're going to release your foot and then take the leg out all the way straight. And then come back onto your back. And then if you want to do little windshield wipers, you could do that. Right on. We're going to pause for a moment. I like to rock on the back of my sacrum. Which, if you don't know what your sacrum is just, it's part of your spine and it's part of your hips. It's the best way for me to think about it. It's technically spinal vertebrae that have fused, but it also forms the back of the basin of the pelvis, right? So the pelvis has these 2 kind of elephant ear looking wingy bits on the sides, and the back of the pelvis is the sacrum, right? So it's technically part of your spine, but in many ways it functions as part of your hips. Okay, so we're going to do the other side. So I'm going to start with putting the strap around that ankle, reaching underneath here so that I have a hold of it where I want it, and then that leg's going over the top, okay? And you're figuring out, like, should I put my foot on the floor? Should I stretch my leg all the way out? And then bring this guy backwards. And again, if you're like me and you have kind of vulnerable knees or knees that are a little bit less, they have a lower range of motion, lesser range of motion, whatever the word is, then you give yourself more room at the knee, right? The heel is farther away from the buttock. If you have more mobility in your knees, you can bring your foot right on in against your buttock. And for me, the shoulder now becomes important because I'm going to let this traction down as the weight of my legs kind of hangs out in space here. I have a little bit less range of motion on this side than I do on the other side, so I've got my foot propped up on this pillow. Sometimes I like to turn the head the opposite direction. That's fun. And we'll stay here for a bit. About another minute or so. Incidentally, this pose can be used kind of in place of the saddle, the half saddle, if that's a really tricky pose for you. If you just found yourself getting really frustrated with that pose and you wind up just laying on your back, think about this pose as being potentially an alternative to it. It's not perfectly the same shape, but it's not that far off, really. And we'll take 3 more big breaths. So I've let go of my strap here. You can let go of your foot, and I'm going to slowly creep this guy out a little bit straighter. And then I'm going to roll onto my back. Oh. And this is where we're going to find ourselves eventually into Shavasana. So you might put something underneath your legs to create a little bit of a softening at the front of the hip. You might create a little bit of a pillow, or you might cover with a blanket, depending on how that feels for you. For me, just having a little tiny roll of blanket under the neck. Not too much. I don't have the really big curve there, but just a little bit. Feels really nice. It's like it's just like a little release, a little softening, a little support. And letting the thighs kind of find their way into a shape or position away from each other. Decide how the arms should be positioned. Should they be far out or closer in, or more like a cactus up above you? And so taking this first few minutes to settle, it might need to do just a little bit of movement first, and then it'll settle. And using a couple of deep breaths with an ah. A little audible sigh. It only has to be audible to you to work. So feel yourself relaxing deeply into the floor. And do a little body scan, starting down at the tips of your toes. And just feel yourself release any tension from the ankle joints of the feet, or the calf muscles, or the legs. And if you notice, like, I'm not completely comfortable there, well then either add a little movement or change the shape in your legs. Maybe you need more of a butterfly. Maybe you need more of a dragonfly shape with the legs out wide. And then allow the legs again to relax deeply. Feel your groins and the front of the hips soften. See if you can picture the beautiful architecture of your spine as it gently curves from the tailbone, around the sacrum, up through the low back, back down through the ribs, up through the neck, and beautifully suspending the head. And then allow the torso and the shoulders and the chest muscles to gently release into that architecture of the spine. And let the arms relax and the palms soften. Soften around your mouth to such a degree that the lips get fluffy. Let your beautiful laugh lines gently soften. And that little space between your eyebrows that is your concentration zone, let that smooth out. Whole body relaxed. Whole body relaxed. Now, yogis, the one benefit to doing yoga at home is that you could technically just stay there for as long as you want. Or you can kind of gently peel yourself up off the floor and take yourself gently and put yourself right to bed with it not having to drive your car anywhere, which is a little different than we're at the gym or at the studio. So if you're ready, though, you might bring your feet to the ground and just sort of gently windshield wiper the legs. It might be nice to stretch first. I just felt the need to create this tiny bit of movement. And then, giving myself some reaches here and there, little banana shapes. I like to lay on my side for a bit. I'm not usually in a big hurry to get out of Shavasana. Now, if you and Shavasana are not the best of friends, and sometimes I think it's such a vulnerable pose that for some of us, it's the hardest yoga pose on the planet. It's like harder than a handstand, harder than some pinky finger balances, if those existed. I like to pretend they do. So if you like to lay on your side for a bit, you can do that. And then when you're ready, you'll sit yourself up. Now, if you just want to keep, carrying on with your Shavasana, don't let me disturb you. Carry right on there, yogis. But if you're ready to end this together, and we'll say goodnight to each other with a namaste. So take a big breath. Let go with a big, deep sigh. Namaste, beautiful yogis.